Welcome back to V3, where you find your voice, learn how to cast a vision, and relentlessly chase victory together by learning from others. Today, I'm joined by the author of Be Known for Something, Mark MacDonald. Mark, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing really great, and I am so looking forward to meeting you and knowing more about what you do, but let's do that through a conversation.
Absolutely. So, Mark, you've worn a ton of hats, and your resume, my guests can't really brag a whole lot on themselves because they got to show humility, but I'll brag for you. Your resume is really cool and impressive. Advertising, communication, design, writing, speaking, church leadership, brand strategist, keynote speaker. Just give us a little snippet of how you got to where you're at, and we'll probably talk about a lot of it, but just give us a rundown of how you got from where you started to where you're at now.
And can you imagine? I'm only 30 years old. No, I'm a little bit older than that. It's so crazy because my kids are now 30 years old, is that feeling of, oh my goodness, so I guess I'm the adult in the room. I can't believe I get to do what I get to do. I'm a Canadian, eh? I'm Canadian born, but I've been an American citizen now for just over 4 years, and which allows me to vote, which finally I get to vote. But I grew up in East Coast Canada. If you go up I-95 all the way to the top, you go through Maine and then you hang right, and that's New Brunswick. And I was raised by two middle class. My dad had his own business after working for the telephone company all of his life, and my mom was a teacher. And out of all of that, I just kept thinking, you know what? I just want to be like Darren from Bewitched, which was, that old show where the guy who was a commercial artist, I think is what they called it at the time. And so I love the idea of advertising and pitching campaigns and creating communication that actually breaks through with clarity. And through all of that, I ended up, I was hired by one of the largest ad agencies in Eastern Canada. And then I started as studio manager and then became production artist and then designer and then art director and then creative director. And when I got to the top, I just thought, you know what? I want God to use what I've learned here for his kingdom. And we had the opportunity to move to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I don't know about you, but I'm one of those guys that when God opens doors, and if you talk to my wife, she'll agree with this, but sometimes the door just swings open. I assume that God's opening that door, and I always look through the door. And we had the opportunity. We moved to Winston and started an ad agency 24 years ago, and it was entirely working with churches, and God just continued to open doors, and we ended up coming to Jacksonville, Florida, where we are now, because the Florida Baptist Convention, who was a client, asked if we'd come and work with their 3,000 Baptist churches here in Florida. And so we moved here, and God's just been continuously blessing and allowing me to do a whole bunch of things that I didn't think I'd be able to do.
I'm kind of in the same boat as you, Mark. And what I connected with your LinkedIn profile and kind of read about you, and we talked a little bit, and I was like, I kind of see myself in that journey a little bit because I was a teacher and a basketball coach, and I was a darn good one. And all of a sudden, God said, "You're done with that. I'm moving you into ministry." And I was really nervous about it, and I thought, man, I just gave up a ton of work that I just wasted, and I was really upset. And I was going through this process, I'm realizing now like that was the phase that prepared me for this phase, because then I started doing coach podcasting, and then out of that came this like, Hunter, you should be using your platform for ministry. So you have a couple hundred coaches listening, and they probably should hear something from someone like them. Which now I'm realizing that opportunity wasn't wasted as a coach and finding success in that, because now I can use it here. And I think it's just really cool what you're doing. And you wrote this incredible church branding book, and it's in the background there if you're looking on the video feed. Be Known for Something by Mark MacDonald, and you should look this up, people. It's really solid. Like everyone, I go to Amazon, I look at the reviews. I want to know what people are saying. The reviews are really good. And the testimonials spark curiosity. When I read them, I'm like, man, I want to check out this book. And writing a book's really hard, Mark. I don't know if people know that. Writing a book can be really hard, especially a good one. So, what snuck up on you about the challenges of writing a book? Because there's people in my life who say, I could be interested in doing this. Can you help them out and say, this is what snuck up on me in the process?
Oh my goodness. Well, to follow up with what you just said, God never wastes any of our experiences. Oftentimes um, God allows a whole bunch of things, good, bad, and ugly, to happen in our lives. And what I have learned through my life as I get older and older, God uses all of those and connects the dots. And ultimately, we're all known for something. And it's just, well, what are we known for? Based upon all of our experiences, and then how do we use those experiences to pivot towards something that um, that really connects. And if we want to connect, we just have to have a lot of clarity in order to be able to connect. And part of that, when I was writing the book, um, you know, the agency was actually called Pinpoint Creative Group when it first started, and it was all about concentric circles. Our logo didn't change very much, but our concentric circles actually turned into a speech bubble because it's pinpointing a particular audience and making sure that we're using clarity to determine what type of audience would actually listen to us, and then clarifying our message to make sure that it actually connects with that audience. And that's, the whole idea. When I was writing the book, I sat down, I thought, who wants to listen to Mark MacDonald, really? And then I started outlining it. Weirdly enough, I had a hard time pinpointing an audience, getting in really,
Mm,
really small. And so what snuck up on me? I guess it was probably the idea that writing a book actually forces clarity. The hardest part was pinpointing, that small audience. And
yeah.
ultimately, the same is true for churches. If you try to write to everyone, you'll connect with no one. And most times churches and organizations, they try to connect with everyone and they end up reaching no one.
Hmm. So I have a question about the church branding and marketing, because whenever I have an idea, I often think, what would the contrarian think? And I try to get ahead of that by viewing that person's viewpoint and attacking it in my head so I'm ready for when they do. And I feel like a contrarian would go, Mark, a church just should preach the word. They shouldn't need to advertise. What would you say to that person?
Well, it's probably one of the tensions that scripture brings to life. Christ died for all, but we can't reach everyone.
Hmm.
We're commanded to reach everyone, but you can't reach or teach who you can't define. And we need to use clarity to be able to define that audience, that God's uniquely placed us into that audience in order to be able to reach them. You're a coach. You can't coach a group of people that you don't really understand and can't define.
Hmm.
Focus, it sharpens the effectiveness of everything that we do. And oftentimes the church does these huge broad strokes, and broad strokes blur impact. Like we try to reach a whole group of people, and we, through it all, we're just adding to noise because these broad strokes are not pinpointed towards a particular audience. And we need to figure out as a church, as people, who is it that God's uniquely placed us in front of? And then how do we actually use clarity to be able to connect with those people?
Yeah, so for clarity purposes, you're not saying the church is not meant for everyone. It's only meant for certain people. You're saying know what your strengths are and be able to hone in on those strengths where it's like in basketball terms where you can't be great at a bunch of random little things. You need to be really good at something. Like my defense has to be really good before I can do a bunch of little nuggets in the defense. And I think that's what you're saying. Am I understanding you correctly?
Absolutely. I mean, God's placed us in a local area,
Hmm.
and it's just so much easier for us to be able to reach them. The problem is the blurriness that's happened is this whole online world. All of a sudden, we can connect rather quickly to a mechanism, a channel, a tool that will take us worldwide. So everyone goes, I want to reach the world. Well, the problem is you can't reach the world because your message isn't clear enough for a clearly defined audience. And so, we just consistently say, get a local audience, somebody who can you can actually reach and touch and be clear about, um, and then from that you can grow your audience to other people who might have the same needs, concerns, and goals of your local audience. And I don't know how much we're going to get into this because there's so many different topics, but this whole online church thing, it almost breaks churches because they they think that they have a much bigger reach than they probably actually have.
So that you actually you're getting into the next subject, and we'll just get right into it then, because you brought it up. In a world full of distractions, we're distracted by everything, technology and traveling sports and just everything. The world is moving so fast. How do we limit our distractions and really centralize our priorities in life and focus on our faith when the world will tell you, go do this, go do that, go do this? Like, where do we start with that, Mark?
Wow, what a great question. I mean, uh, you call them distractions, I call them noise. We all have a ton of noise in our life, whether it's marketing noise or whether it's these um, possibilities. And when you're as talented as you are, I mean, there's lots of opportunities, and sometimes those opportunities become distractions. You know, if you're in a world where there's too many open doors, that's a distraction. Like you have to figure out, you know, how do you discern that that is what Jesus wants you to do? That God wants you to go through this. You know, First of all, I would just say if Jesus isn't on your calendar, then he's not in your life. I
Mhm.
mean, we've got to figure out how do we get him on the calendar? How do we make sure that he's the priority? You know, Oftentimes busyness, it doesn't really mean productivity. It just reveals priorities. Like, I mean, we just have to figure out how do we make sure we prioritize what Jesus wants, and then oftentimes those distractions fall under that. Where sometimes we get caught up in the distraction, and then we ask, how do we throw Jesus into it? Where the priority has to be, um, what is the clarity that Jesus brings to the table that will actually calm things down and the distractions somewhat go away, and we just have to make sure those are the things that are on our calendar.
Right. I think the phrase is show me your calendar and I'll show you your priorities. And I think that that's really true. And you have people who are strong believers and in the faith, and church is like, if I have nothing else, then I'll, go to the Wednesday night or I'll go to the Sunday morning. And my partner Johnny and I, we talked about boundaries on a couple podcasts, and the fact that families need to set boundaries. Like Sunday morning, we are going to set aside for church. Maybe it's Wednesday night, but having boundaries. If you don't have any boundaries at all, you're not going to stay in line. You just kind of let yourself go anywhere you want. And relating to busyness, what are
Well,
your
first of
thoughts?
all, I guess
Yes.
what I would add to that is don't let the urgent replace the eternal. Like
Hmm.
oftentimes, things that we think are really, really important are not all that important. Like we just have
Right.
to, if we're putting Jesus first and we prioritize him, then he will prioritize what are the eternal things. And when it comes to whether you go to church or whether you not go to church, whether your kids, and this might touch on a one of those points where I'm not sure, there's just a whole bunch of tension there, but is your child going to uh be eternally changed because of the sports that they do on a
Yep.
Sunday versus whether they go to a church on Sunday?
There's a great coach, Mark, that his quote was, "Don't mistake activity for achievement." And I use that every year with my team because I was like, just because you guys are doing doesn't mean you're achieving. And a lot of times we trick ourselves into thinking that we'll walk into a gym and we'll walk around, we'll touch a weight, we'll step on the treadmill, but you're really not doing a whole lot. It's the same in our faith. Sometimes we walk into a church and walk out, and we just did some activity. We didn't achieve anything with our faith and growing in that. Um, I, on top of busyness, online church during COVID, really took off, and it can be an incredibly beautiful blessing to somebody who is laid up in their house, whether it's sickness or disability or something like that, to where it's like, oh my gosh, like you can partake in the church with us. What a beautiful thing. However, every good thing also has a bad thing attached to it, and some. You know what? I'll just let you run. What are your thoughts on the whole movement to online church, and how do we really adjust to that?
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, we've been doing this for 24 years, and at Be Known for Something before COVID, we were strongly encouraging pastors that they need to have an online presence. And there was a lot of resistance, and I think that the resistance has carried over, but it's like apprehensively we're going to have online church, but there's the resistance. In the day when I was in high school, one of my projects that I did through my church was I was the guy who would carry around the little cassette player and the cassettes from Sunday, and I would go and visit the shut-ins and just love on them and give them, hey, here's the service that you can listen to. I mean, online church has changed everything. Like think about how easy online church is for the shut-ins. But the problem is that as COVID came along and most of our churches, we couldn't have in-person gatherings, instantly pastors started saying, but think about how easy this
Yeah.
is. Like it's just really easy for you to log on and be able to participate in service. Um, and then our doors opened again, and then it was okay, forget about that ease. Like it's not easy. Like please come back to church, come back in person. The problem is that we all got a taste of how easy it is to just tune in
Yep.
and tune out. And looking at the world and the way that the podcasts have somewhat taken over, it's because it's so easy. People who are listening to this right now, it's easy to do it. And if I'm not interesting or if Hunter's not interesting, okay,
That's going to
well,
happen, by the way.
no, 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 no. Everyone, I'm watching you. Like, keep tuning into this. But the thing is that we graze now. Like we start listening to somebody who's talking on a podcast. If it doesn't really interest us all that much, well, move on to the next episode. And that's where church has found itself. And so we can either try to change the world and their habits, which is going to be almost impossible, or we've got to figure out how do we like dwell in this weird space called online church. What I would recommend is, I mean, online church is really your front door. It's not the living room of your house. Like we just have to figure out how do we use that front door to get people to come in? Oftentimes I hear pastors, they'll push back and behind closed doors, they'll say, okay, so I hate this whole idea. We've lost so many people, they're not coming to church. They're probably going online. Well, if they're still going to church and they're still consuming the content from the church, this is not our problem. Like, this
Hmm.
is a benefit. Instead of them just staying home and doing whatever, well, if they're actually listening online, this is a good thing. Like, the amount of people going to church has declined, and it's going to continue to decline. So we just have to figure out how do we get them to at least consume some good content. But um, this on ramp, most people will probably find your church through your online ministries. It's got to be done well, and it's got to be done to a point where we're reaching the curious in such a way that they say, wow, maybe I should go in person. And where I feel that the church is dropping the ball is that we're gaining the curiosity of people, but we're not giving them good reasons of why they need to actually attend in person. We
Yeah.
kind of need both. Like, we need to be able to put content out there that will gain the attention of people all around the world. But we should use digital to invite, because in person is where true discipleship happens.
Right. It should somehow work as a bridge to your church at some point. And I think the hard part though is in the pastoral side, it's really hard to undo comfort. And during COVID, everyone got so comfortable just staying at home and watching from their pajamas and not having to worry about driving in. And that's probably the hardest thing on my end is challenging comfort in the spirit of grace and truth. John 1, as Jesus did. How do we say truth? It can be a cop out for you to not integrate in a community of believers. Grace, I'm really happy that you're tuning into our church service still. And how do we mesh those and bring those people in? Like you said, I don't think anyone has like a perfect answer, but it's probably offer and pray. Well, I guess the first thing, let's just pray for them and hope that their move to come, but then offer up ministries or outreach events or something like that that causes them to take that next step in curiosity toward your church building. Have any like closing thoughts on that online church community and role that we have to play in it before we go on to communication?
Well, I mean, online grows access to your church, but it lacks deep connection. And that whole idea of um, is is online church real church? I think that we have to stop bashing that.
Hmm.
Um, you don't want somebody who hears it online to think, wow, they don't like that I'm watching it online, because it's granting access to a message of whatever you're offering. But we also, one of the crazy things that I get to do is mystery visits. So I'm the secret shopper for churches. So a church can hire me, and oftentimes I know very little bit about the church, but I do some research to figure out, so who is their target audience, who is in their reach area, and then I take on that persona when I go to the church. Um, you know, it that just exposes an awful lot of things to me, because I get to see an awful lot of ministry. And and what I've found is that the churches that grumble behind closed doors that too many people are watching online and they're not coming in person are obviously praying for them, but not saying it out loud. Like,
Yeah.
there's 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 no compelling reason for someone to come in person. And so we need to figure out if it is uh, the way that we want as a church to have people to come in person, we need to be a little bit clearer on our message of why there's a benefit, and it can't be perceived as a benefit for the church. It has to be a benefit for the person.
Right. Like you can't just basically say you need to come here because we need more people here. That's you caring
Well,
about
and I
you.
think that a lot of times people here, like the perception of church is oftentimes you're all about money, so they quickly go to that perception and they say, well, no wonder why you want me to go, because you just want to put an offering plate in front of me. And we need to have better reasons, or else people will fall back on their perceptions.
Absolutely. I want to move on to church communication and communication in general because you've held several job titles in that department. And I think in the technological world, this is really important to talk about. But first, you held the title of Executive Director of Center for Church Communication. What really did you do in that role and what did you learn from it?
It was like one of those God things, because when I set up the agency 24 years ago, we somewhat were one of the only ones. There might have been two or three of us that said, no, we're an agency for churches. And people were like, so what do you do? And it's, well, we help you set up websites. And people are like, do we need a website? Like, that's how long ago that was. And so we kind of hit a brick wall. I can still remember some of the churches that I talked to. They're like, "Oh, that's nice, but I don't know that we need a website." Well, okay, sorry. What about branding? And then as soon as you bring, I mean, even today, you say throw out church branding, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of apprehension over, like, is that scriptural? Is that the right thing to do? For me, church branding, just before I jump back into what we're actually
Yeah.
talking about,
Go
church
wherever you
branding
want, man.
is,
This is your show.
well, church branding is, all it is just connecting your message to a particular group of people who need that message. That's called evangelism. So good church branding is excellent evangelism. We need to figure out how do we become relevant to a small particular group of people with a very clear message. And if you use clarity, you will always have connection. And given that, we kind of breathed into the world this new concept that sounded very secular, very business, and the church kind of pushed back on us. And a couple of years after we did that, this group called Center for Church Communication decided that they were going to create a blog, and they wanted to really upend what churches were doing on the marketing side, because a lot of us in the world, in the secular world, we would look at the church and go, oh my goodness, like, oh, that's awful. And so they said, well, if we're going to poke away at the church, what are we going to call our blog? And they came up with the name Church Marketing Sucks. And the way that, like, even now when I say the word sucks out loud, I know that there's a ripple across the audience of people that go, oh my goodness, how can you be a Christian and say that word out loud? And that's really what they did so many years ago. They wanted a word that would just bristle the
Hmm.
church. And what Church Marketing Sucks blog took off. It was like this underground, everyone would be like, oh my goodness, did you see what they did? And then what they wrote about, and they poked and poked and poked. And everyone in the church that was trying to deal with this change in people, not that you would ever deal with that, but there's a group of older people in a church that oftentimes likes the way that we've always done it and the very traditional way. And then there's this newer group of people that are like, no, there's got to be a better way. There's more opportunities, there's more online, there's more things. And for some reason, the tension between those two groups oftentimes loses because one group, I'm not going to mention which group, gives the money. So that's where, like, well, the group that don't give the money would actually read this free blog that was out there, and they're like, yes, what they said, that's it. So as it gained popularity, people would say to us, oh my goodness, you remind me of church marketing sucks. And
Hmm.
so as an agency, we would constantly say, so did you read that? Have you seen what they recently said? Well, that's what we do. We actually help people with their church marketing. And the cool part of all of that, fast forward over a decade later, they asked me to be their executive director for the Center for Church Communication. And as much as I would like to say everyone knows me for being known for something, when I stand on a stage and I say, and I was the executive director for Search Center for Church Communication, usually there's nothing, and I'll say, and their blog was Church Marketing Sucks. I get people go, oh my goodness, I can't believe you are part of Church Marketing Sucks. And so that kind of clears the way for me to be able to talk a little bit more about let's not just stir the pot. Let's figure out how do we change things for the good.
Yeah, so one thing I want to ask you, you've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of people, a lot of hesitant people, and I don't want to stereotype a whole generation, but it's typically someone who's a bit older and more traditional, and they don't want a whole lot of change. And I think a lot of churches are dealing with that as much as they don't want to admit they are. I think it's just part of life. I think it's part of any business. I know as a teacher, you'd have the teachers who wanted things to stay the same and the ones who want to change. It's not throwing shade at anyone. I think everyone is dealing with this thing. It's transition of preference. What have you found in those meetings, being in those rooms, that kind of helps bridge that gap between the two parties?
Well, I think the scripture is really clear that we need to honor the elders in the room. And I don't say that because I'm the elder in this room, but I think that that sober second thought of I've already been there, done that, it didn't work for me is invaluable to the church. I think that we um and again, I don't know you enough to know where you fall theologically,
Hmm.
but to me, if the Bible says it, then we need to follow it. Like, I
Yeah.
mean,
We're a
that's
Bible church. We're a Bible church. So we're all for the Bible says it, do it.
amen. And the thing is that where the muddiness comes in is the method in doing it. So oftentimes the older people in the room will conflate those things together. So they'll say, no, that new method of doing this great thing is wrong. And it's like, no, what if there's a way that we can change for the good so that we reach more people? Well, most times the older person in the room, the more traditional person, will say, okay, now we're talking. Now we do need to reach more people. And I think that it really comes down to what communication is. Communication isn't bad or good. It's the content of the communication that's bad or good. We're called to preach the word. We're called, like, that message that we have should not change just because of the tool that we're using. Instead, we need to figure out how do we become relevant to a world who's using those other tools. And and the way we do that is by convincing the people that the message is going to stay the same. We're just going to do things a little bit different. But most people resist drastic change. Like, we're not doing bulletins anymore. Well, you want to stir the pot, you just take away their bulletin. So what we would say is, okay, we know that the world resists print information now because most of us know it's just a whole lot easier to go online and find it. But for those people who are in that transitional period where they're somewhat resisting it in the world, but they're certainly saying, well, we can control it here at the church, so we need our print stuff. Well, do print stuff, but just have it a little bit smaller. And what we've oftentimes found is that when you take something away from somebody, just make sure that you have a genuine, well done thing to add in its place, and to comfort those people to say and see all the message is the same, and be able to work, because we're in a transitional period. If somebody's over, I don't even know what the age would be, probably 55 or 60. If they're over that, they're going to have a comfort level on things that they have had in the past, um, and we have to somewhat shift, but we have to do it in a transitional way so that we're giving them a little bit of what they're looking for, and then reinforcing that the message is actually going to stay the same.
Absolutely. Mark, there's a famous story of my grandmother, and she was married to a man who was on the leadership of a church that my father-in-law was a pastor of. And they they walked into the office one day, and she was found holding up the church bulletin, a magnifying glass, and a ruler, because she was convinced they were trying to shrink the word Baptist slowly out of the bulletin. And that's a famous story because I ended up marrying the pastor's daughter, and my grandma was really critical of that whole process. But it goes to show, like, that there's a fear based of like these young people are trying to take away what's special to us. And I think the young people are saying, no, we're not trying to take it away. We're trying to also create a future for us too, because if you go and left it as it is, we may not have a church to come back to because we don't have enough young families or enough staying power in this culture to survive. So there is that tension, and that's the hard part of leadership. You got to figure out ways to bridge gaps between those two groups. Today, I'm joined by Mark MacDonald. He is the author of Be Known for Something. You can find this book on basically the major book selling sites. His socials are really good too. Find him on LinkedIn. He posts a lot of awesome articles to his website as well. Mark, we talked about technology and becoming a technological world, but communication. So communication is important as ever, because now people are having a hard time reading tone and sarcasm, and just a lot of things are creating barriers in our communication because we're in this text message world. What have you learned about teaching communication to people in this world of technology?
Oh, I mean, this whole idea of technology has made things so easy. Like it's just that we have to use them. Um, and therein lies the rub. Oftentimes it's the cost of entry. And is the church willing to do the cost entry? COVID um did what no church could ever do. Like the COVID slowed the entire world down so that the church could catch up. And in that catching up, oftentimes, we added online, we added all the things that we probably should have done a long time ago. And oftentimes we're doing it in such a manner that it's not well done. And so we need to make sure that, you know uh just because, and this is the tension that I oftentimes feel, is like, okay, just because the world's doing it doesn't mean that the church has to be doing it. But if the majority of the world is doing something and it's not right or wrong, it's just a thing, let me finish that thought, because I'm notorious at not finishing thoughts. Um, but if they're doing it, that means that the world likes it. There's got to be a reason why the world likes it. And if it's something that the church can use for the good of evangelism, telling them about the gospel, then we need to jump onto this. You know, go back to when my kids were probably about your age, in their teens. Um, but I can still remember them saying, "Dad, we've discussed this, and we need new phones." And I said, "Why on earth do you need new phones? I mean, those are perfectly good flip phones." And they said, well, there's this thing, Dad, you probably don't even know about it, but it's called texting. And I'm like, I know about texting. And they're like, it's just really difficult because you have to press repeatedly all these numbers. And I don't even know whether you remember that or not, but it was incredibly difficult to text. And I said, so, but why do you want to text? And my son said, because that's where all my friends are. If I'm going to be a friend to them, I have to text with them. And then in the old sounding voice that I could possibly do, I said to them, you can't really be friends on text because it's something that I had never experienced at that point. But now, like fast forward, oh my word, I have so many text friends. I mean, we've emailed and texted and like there's communication there. I have so many pastors that I connect with and so many communications people that I've never met in person, but I would say are really good friends of mine.
Mm,
And 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 what we have to realize is that just because we don't understand how it can happen doesn't mean that they don't understand. And that's where the church, when it comes to online communication, digital communication, we're really quick to say you can't have church online, but they are experiencing church online. If there is something that we need to get them to step up to and experience differently in person, then how do we do this in this crazy world that we live in? The church that we go to here in Jacksonville, it's a great church. I mean, they have, I think they're up to 12 campuses now, and they run about 30,000, 35,000 every Sunday in person.
wow.
But online they experience about 40 to 50,000 people online. So should the church just shut it down? We're not doing online anymore. Like, let's just we got to require everyone to come in person. The crazy part of it all is as they monitor where those online viewers are, they realize that they're all over the world. And what's really great is that, from time to time there'll be a baptism and the pastor will say, I want you to meet so and so who is from Chicago or is from, another part of the world. And then he'll say, this person came to the Lord through the online ministry of this church. We're going to welcome them into our church. And that to me speaks incredibly huge volumes of what the church's impact can do. What our church struggles with is, so how do they have like in-person church when they're connected to our church? Well, we try to connect them with a great church, but what they're trying to do now is, okay, so if you have other people that in your area who watch our church online, why not get together and have a house church where you're watching it together online and then sharing with each other and doing life together? And what our church has always committed to is, if we do it in person, we offer an alternative online. So if you want to have a small group, there is an online small group that you can join, and you
Mm,
can do it. You can have relationships like this. Well, that's pushing the envelope, I realize, for a lot of churches. But
yeah.
somehow, if small groups are very important and we're using online ministry as an on-ramp to our churches, we need to figure out, how do we then do the next step? Is it requiring them to come? Is it requiring them to, get a small group in your own community? Or is it, telling them about another great evangelical church in their area?
I've been the cranky guy on the other side going, why can't you just come? At the same time, Mark, I couldn't do this podcast without the virtual connections and the coaching community that I'd connected with for 8 years of being a coach in Wisconsin. I had all these connections across the state and now across really the Midwest to the South that I wouldn't have without it. So at the same time, I can't necessarily condemn something that I'm utilizing as well. I mean, I have a Friday study every week with a coach in Virginia now, and how cool is that that we get to do that together? And you couldn't do that without an online presence. So it is a weird. I think we could name this podcast "The Tension" because the tension between those two things, I think someone could write an amazing book or do a series on just the tension we face in church leadership between two groups, and there's always this push pull, and that's what you get paid to do as the leader, unfortunately, is figure out how to solve that tension between those two groups. And I just think what you said is absolutely right. One of the last topics I want to get to is I read a lot of your articles, and Mark publishes some really cool articles on his website. I'll let him plug at the end of this podcast here. But one of the things you mentioned was that 1/3 of our communities have no perceived need for a local church. What does that data mean, and how did you get to it?
And this is the rub. And I guess the rub is another way to say tension. And and even to connect it to everything else that we're doing, tension and the rub means that there is connection. We just have to figure out how do we solve that in such a way so that we don't break the connection. Um, you know, 1/3 of our communities have no perceived need for our local church. That should just grieve us.
Hmm.
And and as a communication person, to me, it means that churches are answering questions that no one's asking.
Yeah.
And we have a formula here, say their name, speak their pain, solutions to proclaim. Oftentimes the church is just randomly, loudly screaming solutions, and the community don't even know it's for them.
Hmm.
And so that's why it needs to be in that order. We need to say their name. We have to have clarity on who we're talking to, defining that group of people, then speak their pain. There's something in their life that is not going well. We have a solution. We have Jesus Christ, who is the solution for the needs, concerns, and goals in their life. Jesus said, "They will know you're my disciples by your love one towards another," and we suck at it. Like we're just really bad at coming across as what we love. Instead, the worldwide perception study of the church is what we're against, which is the opposite of love. And so
Hmm.
what we need to do is we need to figure out how do we love this group of people that God has placed us in the middle of so that we can clearly define to them we understand your pains, your concerns, your goals, and we understand because we've been there. And
Yeah.
that's where the church can say, for all of sin, all of us have fallen short. We all struggle. Here's how we've found the solution. And we know that through that solution that you're going to have a gain in your life. And if we can control that gain so that we're giving testimonials and stories, then people will go, okay, walk me through that solution again. Where oftentimes we're throwing the solution so fast that they're just like not into it. You don't understand me. There's no connection at all, and clarity will create that connection.
And how has that changed over the last, I don't know, 20 years as far as the perceived need for a local church? Because we're at 1/3, roundabout now. How has that changed in the last decade or two?
Well, and we try as much as possible to find as much research, and
Hmm.
and thank God for all of the Christian research that is available to us out there. Um, what we've realized is that since 2000, in the last 20, 25 years, what we're looking at is about a 20% drop in church attendance. What
Mm.
that tells us is that there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between our audience because it's like, you drive by a restaurant and you go, "Oh, what used to be in there?" And like it's closed, and you think, I thought that restaurant was important. Didn't people like the food there? And it's like, well, I wonder what else is coming along. Well, our churches, people are driving by our churches, and if there's no perceived value in consuming the solution that we have to offer, then we are totally invisible to them. And through that, in being invisible, people just slowly, it's like, the I don't even know what the commercials for the nose blindness about how you spray Febreze, I think it is. But we have location blindness. If it's not a solution to us, we don't see it. And our churches are in a world that have just totally made us invisible. We have to figure out how do we break through that and become clearly a solution to them. And it probably won't sound very spiritual, which will shock some people, but we need to connect our message of hope and Jesus Christ and the gospel on the back of what they're actually looking for. And if we don't do that, our solutions just become just noise that
Yeah.
people don't listen to at all.
Yeah. And if you're listening, I want to provide some hope. Just from my on uh, unprofessional, uncertified research of working with kids for about 10 years, I've sensed a burning curiosity in kids in the last few years that I haven't sensed in the previous 7, 8 years. Beginning of my teaching career and coaching career and things like that, I had a hard time moving the needle as far as kids just being curious. Like, hey, I have this Bible study, I have this church group. I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And I think COVID and I think the darkness of society and the politics and the fighting and all the hate, I think it's making them more curious. Like, there's got to be something good for me out there. There's got to be something that has hope in it out there. So I know all the numbers and statistics for the decline in church attendance, but I think the hope is I do sense with the kids that I've interacted with a curiousness and a desire for hope that I haven't sensed in the previous decade. In the last few years, I can almost perk up any kid's ear now. They may not come, but about a Bible study or a church event or something like that. It's not the promise that they're going to take you up on it or show up, but they're curious now and they're willing to hear you out. And I had a lot of people ask me, what were the success of your basketball teams? What did you think? I think it's because they all came to one of my Bible studies or church together throughout the year, and maybe one or two of them was a believer. I think they were just super curious about what this was about, and they fell in love with the family aspect of it. So I do sense hope on the horizon for us, society. That's why we can't quit. That's why we can't go, these kids or this generation or this or that or whatever. I got into starting ministry because I was tired of hearing pastors say, kids, they stop going to church when they go to college, and the statistics are horrible, horrible, horrible. And I was like, where's the hope? Like, where is the action? We're just pointing out horrible statistics, no action.
Well, and just because you have declared that the topic of this whole podcast is tensions that we face, let me just throw a little tension into that. I agree that curiosity um, is rising.
Hmm.
There's some people outside are looking at us and they're being curious. So I quickly say, so every church needs to discover a thread that will answer the question as to why are you a solution in my life?
Hmm.
And again, it will not be spiritual. We shouldn't lead with the gospel. We should lead to the gospel. And so we need to figure out, how do they feel love so that they go, oh, you want to listen to me? Because that curiosity is huge.
Right.
However, the tension on the other side is that I think it was Barna did a research
Yeah.
study that said that only 4% of Gen Z hold a biblical worldview.
Yep.
That means that they're curious, but we're not delivering. We're not, the distribution of the truth is not being delivered properly through the church. And we need to fix that, or else we're just going to continue. They're going to be curious and they're going to find solutions in other places.
Right. And I think that goes into the whole component of, the older generations understanding that like we're kind of at war here with society, and we need to try to do the best we can to get these curious kids. And because I've seen the research too in Barna, I'm a big Barna guy for youth research. And I've seen it too, and it's kind of shrinking and shrinking as far as like kids in the church attendance and things like that. So I hope I want to clarify just my perception being in schools is that they're more curious about the message I'm bringing them. They may not be taking up on it, but that's our job to get them in the church. That's our job to bring the message to them. And well, the Holy Spirit will do the work. We just got to be the vessel in that. So it's not necessarily my job, but at the same time, it's our duty to try to reach them. And that's a tension we have to bring into those meetings with the traditionalists or people that don't want to get younger. We're going to go, man, in 20 years when this generation's gone, do we want a whole generation of people just living in darkness? No, like we have to find a way to reach these kids. And that's the tension we're trying to solve. So you're right, Mark. I think we just label this podcast tension and Christianity tensions. And that's kind of the whole point.
Well, and you know, I wrestle oftentimes is like, so why am I doing all of this when the Holy Spirit can just do it himself? And yet, the cool part of the gospel is that the Holy Spirit, who could just do it themselves, himself, relies on us to do it.
Mm-hmm.
We're called to make sure that we have a clear message of hope and of love and of the gospel, and it will break through if we're just clear enough to have something, you know, something that they actually want, that we deliver them what they want and then give them what they need. And we need to figure out, how do we break into that world and actually love them to a point where you're known for love, and then move it on to, okay, and the reason why we love you is because of the gospel. And Jesus will solve all their problems, but they don't know that, like, it's a concept that is becoming more and more foreign to them. We're really, um, we're in a post-Christian world, and we have to realize that our mentality needs to be more like missionaries, where we go, we live amongst them, we love on them, we help them, we do life together with them, and then they'll see a different way, so that we can offer them hope and on the back of the love, and the gospel does that.
Mark, I could have talked to you for a long time. I think for the sake of our time, though, we've got to close up shop here. But I want you to plug your book, your socials, your articles. Where can people find your stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, again, the book is Be Known for Something, and I mean, it became an Amazon bestseller, which is just a total God thing. But what it does is it helps you become relevant to a world that needs your message. And you can, Amazon's probably the best place to jump on there. There's audio edition, there's a digital edition, and there's also that print edition, so that you can smell the pages as you turn them. And then if you want to follow me, I mean, be known for something. We have channel, all the different social media channels, but also Mark Mac 1023 will usually get me at all the channels as well. But if you go to beknownforsomething.com, and you go to our articles page, you can search through. I've written over 900 magazine articles, and you can search through all of those. But also you can subscribe to them, and every week we'll send you one fresh to your inbox, and it's just a very quick 1 minute read of things you should be changing in your church and also in your personal communications.
Well, whoever your graphic designer is awesome. I love your graphics and your posts. I don't know who it is, but whoever does it does a really good job. Is it you or do you have someone that does it?
I have a team of graphic designers, fortunately, but I am a graphic designer. That's my
Okay.
degree, so I do a fair amount of it.
It looks really good. It's awesome stuff. Our website, v3content.org, is live. We'll post blogs, access these podcast videos. And my reach, Mark, I hope, is to identify parents who are stuck in the busyness of life, typically in the realm of sports, and they're just so busy and inundated with everything in life. And just to find someone to speak into them and say, it's okay to slow down. It's okay to put your faith first if you're an athlete. It's okay to take the time to go to church rather than go to this event. And that's my audience. And I've been really grateful for the positive responses, and having you on is just really special as I go into a couple of weeks with pastors now, and try to reach those people and just go, we're fighting that battle alongside of you. We love you. Let's fight together. Let's raise up the next generation well. So, Mark, I'm super grateful for you, and we appreciate having you on, man.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you guys next week.